The checkered blanket felt rough beneath Clara's hands, its familiar red and white pattern a map of countless family gatherings. The late afternoon sun dappled through the leaves of the old oak tree, painting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the scene. Laughter from the children echoed from the far side of the park, a joyful, chaotic symphony that usually warmed Clara's heart. But today, a knot had formed in her stomach, tight and cold, since the moment they'd arrived. It was the annual family picnic, an event that was supposed to be about togetherness, but for Clara it had become a stage for a quiet, painful play she was forced to watch. Her daughter, Maya, sat beside her, her small legs, clad in pink leggings, stretched out. At 7 years old, Maya saw the world in vibrant, simple colors, good or bad, happy or sad, fair or unfair. She was meticulously arranging a line of fallen leaves, her brow furrowed in concentration. Clara watched her, a fierce, protective love swelling in her chest. Maya was her world, a bright, curious soul who deserved every ounce of happiness the universe had to offer. The focal point of the gathering, as it always seemed to be, was her sister Laura and Laura's daughter Amelia. They held court near the portable grill where Laura's husband, Mark, was flipping burgers. Laura's laughter was loud and confident, a sound that drew people in. Today she was recounting a story about Amelia's latest triumph at her ballet recital. The family was captivated. Grandparents, aunts, and uncles listened with rapt attention, their faces glowing with pride. Amelia, a year older than Maya, stood in the center of the circle, a miniature queen in a frilly yellow dress. She accepted the praise with a practiced smile, her blonde curls bouncing as she twirled on cue. A few moments later, someone brought out a cupcake with a single unlit candle. It wasn't Amelia's birthday, but the gesture felt symbolic, an impromptu celebration of her general wonderfulness. Then, led by Laura, the family began to sing. Not happy birthday, but for she's a jolly good fellow. Their voices, a bit off-key but full of genuine affection, rose in the warm air. Clara felt Maya stiffen beside her. The little girl had stopped arranging her leaves. Her gaze was fixed on the celebrating group, her brown eyes wide and unblinking. Clara's heart began to beat a little faster. She knew that look. It was the dawning of a question, the quiet turning of gears in a mind that was starting to piece together the unspoken rules of their family dynamic. The song finished, followed by a round of applause just for Amelia. Laura hugged her daughter tightly, beaming as if she had just won a prestigious award. Clara tried to catch her sister's eye, to offer a smile, but Laura was absorbed in her daughter's glow. That was when Maya turned to her. She tugged on the sleeve of Clara's blouse, her voice small but clear, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Mommy," she asked, her gaze earnest and heartbreakingly innocent, "why don't they sing for me like that?" The question hung in the air between them, a fragile, trembling thing. Before Clara could even begin to formulate an answer that wouldn't shatter the perfect image of family she so desperately wanted Maya to have, a sound pierced the moment. It was Laura's laugh, a short, sharp, nervous burst of sound. She had overheard. Laura glanced over, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh, honey," she called out, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud. That was just a silly, spontaneous thing for Amelia. She didn't look at Maya when she said it. She looked at Clara, and in that fleeting glance, Clara saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just annoyance at being put on the spot. But Maya wasn't looking at her aunt. She was looking at her mother, her eyes searching Clara's face for the truth, for an explanation that would make sense of the sudden, sharp feeling of being invisible. Clara pulled her daughter close, the scent of sunshine and freshly cut grass in her hair. She wanted to build a wall around her, to protect her from the subtle slights and unspoken hierarchies that even a child could feel. She had no easy answer. How could she explain that her own sister, the woman who had shared her childhood, seemed to see her daughter as a supporting character in Amelia's glittering production? How could she explain the pang of jealousy and resentment that coiled in her own gut, a feeling she was deeply ashamed of? "It's complicated, sweetie," she whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. The knot in her stomach tightened. She knew this was no longer just about a song at a picnic. It was about years of accumulated moments, of comparisons and quiet competitions that she had tried to ignore. Maya's innocent question hadn't just asked about a song. It had pulled back the curtain on a painful truth Clara had been avoiding for years. And now, she had to decide what to do about it. The rest of the picnic passed in a blur of strained smiles and carefully chosen words. Clara tried to pull Maya back into the fold, suggesting a game of tag or a trip to the swings on the other side of the park, but the light had gone out of her daughter's eyes. Maya clung to her side, her earlier bubbly energy replaced by a quiet, watchful stillness. She ate her burger without comment, her gaze occasionally drifting back to her cousin, who was now showing off a new, expensive-looking toy drone Mark had just unboxed. Laura, for her part, seemed determined to pretend the incident hadn't happened. She bustled around, offering people more potato salad, her laughter as loud and frequent as ever. She made a wide loop around Clara and Maya, a subtle avoidance that was as loud as any accusation. It was a classic Laura maneuver. Create a moment of discomfort and then act as if the other person's reaction was the actual problem. As they packed their checkered blanket, folding the memories of the day into its squares, Laura finally approached. "It was a great turnout, wasn't it?" she said, her tone breezy. Mark was already loading their cooler into their oversized SUV. "It was fine," Clara replied, her voice tight. Laura's smile became a little fixed. "Clara, you can't be upset about that silly song. The kids were just having fun. You're being too sensitive." "Maya noticed, Laura," Clara said, keeping her voice low. "She asked me why no one ever sings for her." Laura sighed, a gust of theatrical exasperation. "Oh, for heaven's sake, she's 7. She'll forget about it in 5 minutes. Amelia is just, you know how she is. She's got a big personality. She commands attention." The words hung there, an unspoken comparison. Amelia is a star. Maya is not. Clara didn't have the energy for a fight. Not here. Not in front of the kids. She simply shook her head, zipped up their cooler bag, and took Maya's hand. "We're going to head out. Say bye to everyone, sweetie." Maya gave a small, shy wave in the general direction of her relatives. No one seemed to notice their departure. They were all clustered around the new drone, which Amelia was now expertly piloting in looping circles, their upturned faces filled with admiration. The car ride home was quiet. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, and the silence inside the car felt heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts. Clara glanced at Maya in the rearview mirror. Her daughter was staring out the window, a small, forlorn figure in her car seat. The usual post-park chatter, the endless stream of questions and observations, was absent. Clara's heart ached. This was what she had feared. The poison of comparison was seeping in, tainting Maya's bright spirit. She knew she had to say something, to try and frame the day in a way that would protect her daughter. "You know," Clara began, her voice soft, "you are the most wonderful singer I know." Maya didn't look at her. "No, I'm not." "You are," Clara insisted gently. "Remember the song you made up about the squirrel in our backyard? The one with the fluffy tail? It made me so happy. I remember that song more than any other song." A small sniffle came from the back seat. "But Aunt Laura and Grandma and Grandpa don't remember it." Clara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. How could she explain the complex, tangled web of adult emotions to a child? How could she explain that her own sister's insecurities seemed to manifest as a need to constantly elevate her own daughter, often at the expense of others? How could she explain that their grandparents were simply swept up in the narrative Laura so masterfully created? "Sometimes," Clara said, choosing her words with immense care, "people get so focused on the loudest voice in the room that they forget to listen for the sweetest one. But that doesn't mean the sweet voice isn't there. It's there. I hear it. And it's my favorite one." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Your favorite one?" she asked, her voice wavering. "My absolute favorite," Clara confirmed, her own voice thick with emotion. "Always." When they got home, Maya went straight to her room, clutching the stuffed narwhal she'd had since she was a toddler. Clara stood in the hallway, listening to the silence. The house felt empty, hollowed out by the events of the day. She walked into the living room and sank onto the sofa. It was one thing for her to feel overshadowed by Laura. That was the story of their lives. Clara was the quiet, steady one. Laura was the dazzling, demanding one. But it was another thing entirely to see that same pattern being forced upon their children. She wouldn't let Maya's childhood be defined by the shadow of her cousin. She wouldn't let her daughter grow up believing she was less deserving of songs, of praise, of attention. The passivity, the quiet acceptance that had been Clara's coping mechanism for years, was no longer an option. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the little girl in the other room, whose innocent question had finally shattered Clara's silence. Picking up her phone, she scrolled to Laura's name. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she knew the time for avoiding the conversation was over. For Maya's sake, she had to find her voice. Her thumb trembled over the screen, the glowing green call icon a beacon of confrontation. Clara took a deep breath, the air tasting of stale fear and fresh resolve, and pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, a rhythmic, electronic pulse that echoed the frantic beat of her own heart. "Hey, I was just about to call you," Laura's voice chirped, impossibly cheerful. "I found the cutest little tennis bracelet I think Amelia would just die for, and I wanted to know if you thought—" "Laura," Clara cut in, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm not calling about a bracelet. We need to talk about what happened at the park." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. When Laura spoke again, the manufactured warmth had vanished, replaced by a brittle, defensive edge. "Clara, I already told you. It was nothing. A spontaneous little song. You cannot be this worked up over something so trivial." "It wasn't trivial to Maya," Clara stated, picturing her daughter's face, the confusion in her eyes. She felt excluded. She noticed that Amelia gets celebrated for just existing, while she is expected to be a quiet spectator. "And this wasn't a one-time thing, Laura. This is a pattern. It has been for years." A scoff. "A pattern? What are you talking about? I can't help it if Amelia is a little more effervescent. She has a star quality. People are drawn to her. I'm not going to apologize for my daughter's personality." The accusation, thinly veiled, was that Maya lacked that star quality, that she was somehow deficient. The protective anger inside Clara, which had been simmering for hours, now began to boil. "This has nothing to do with their personalities," Clara retorted, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "This is about you. You constantly position Amelia in the spotlight. You engineer these situations, these little moments of adoration, and you don't seem to care who you push into the shadows to do it. Today, it was my daughter, and I'm not going to let it happen again." "Oh, I see." Laura's voice dripped with condescending pity. "So this is what this is about. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're jealous of my daughter because she shines a little brighter than yours." The accusation was so unfair, so deeply twisted, that for a moment, it stole Clara's breath. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, turning Clara's legitimate concern into a petty, personal failing. In the past, this tactic would have worked. Clara would have faltered, questioned herself, and ultimately retreated, wounded. But not tonight. "Don't you dare," Clara said, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare twist this into some pathetic story about my jealousy to absolve yourself of your behavior. I am talking about a 7-year-old girl whose feelings were hurt by her own family, her aunt, her grandparents. Because you orchestrate a constant parade for your daughter and expect everyone else to throw confetti. Well, I'm done throwing confetti, Laura. And I will not allow Maya to think she's worth less because her cousin's mother has an insatiable need for a reflected glow." The line was dead silent for a long moment. Clara could hear Laura's sharp, indignant breathing. "You're hysterical," Laura finally spat, the words like chips of ice. "I don't have time for this. When you're ready to stop being so ridiculously sensitive and dramatic, you can call me back. Or don't." The click was sharp and final. Laura had hung up on her. Clara stood in the silent living room, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her entire body was trembling, a cocktail of adrenaline and rage coursing through her. There was a part of her that felt sick, that wanted to curl into a ball and weep at the brokenness between her and her sister. But underneath it, a new, unfamiliar feeling was blooming. A strange, shaky sense of pride. She hadn't backed down, she hadn't apologized. She had spoken the truth, even if it had caused an explosion. She lowered the phone and walked softly down the hall to Maya's room. Pushing the door open a crack, she saw her daughter asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight. The narwhal was tucked under her arm, its single horn pointing toward the ceiling. Maya's chest rose and fell in the easy, untroubled rhythm of sleep. This was why she'd done it. For this small, perfect person who deserved to move through the world believing in her own worth, a worth that wasn't dependent on the applause of others. The next morning, Clara's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a group text from her mother. "Hi, girls! Just a reminder that we're celebrating Mom and Dad's 50th anniversary next Saturday at the Willows at 7 p.m. Please let me know your final numbers by Wednesday. It's so important that we are all there. Love you." Clara stared at the message. The Willows was a formal, expensive restaurant. An anniversary dinner. An event where the entire family would be present, trapped together at a table. A command performance she could not escape. Her stomach tightened, the familiar knot returning. The picnic had been a skirmish in the park. The phone call had been a declaration of war. The anniversary dinner, she now realized, would be the first major battle. She would have to face Laura, and her parents, and the whole family, knowing what she now knew and having said what she had said. There would be no avoiding it. The curtain had been pulled back, and now they would all have to play their parts on a brightly lit stage. The week leading up to the anniversary dinner was a masterclass in strategic silence. Laura didn't call, she didn't text. Her social media, usually a vibrant stream of Amelia's accomplishments and staged, candid family photos, went quiet. It was a calculated absence, a silence designed to be felt, to make Clara question herself, to make her feel the chill of her sister's ostracism. Even their mother, who usually sent a flurry of texts coordinating outfits and timings, was uncharacteristically reserved, her messages brief and logistical, devoid of their usual warmth. Clara knew Laura had spun her version of the story, casting herself as the bewildered victim of Clara's unhinged, jealous outburst. Clara was being iced out. On Saturday evening, Clara stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was a dress she'd always loved, but tonight it felt like armor. She had done her hair and makeup with more care than usual, not out of vanity, but out of a need to present a calm, composed front. A front that said, "You will not break me." Maya was spending the night with a friend from school, a small mercy for which Clara was profoundly grateful. The thought of navigating this evening with her daughter in tow, of having to shield her from the inevitable undercurrents of tension, was exhausting. Tonight, the battle was hers alone. The Willows was exactly as she'd imagined, hushed, opulent, and intimidating. A symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversations filled the high-ceilinged room. Her parents were already there, seated at a large round table in a private alcove. As Clara approached, she saw her father rise, his smile looking a little weary. Her mother remained seated, offering a tight, cool smile that didn't reach her eyes. And there, across the table, was Laura. She was radiant in a shimmering silver dress, her hair swept into an elaborate updo. Amelia and Mark were beside her. Laura met Clara's gaze for a fleeting second, her expression a perfect, polished mask of indifference, before turning to say something to her husband. The dismissal was as sharp as a slap. "Clara, you look lovely," her father said, kissing her cheek. "You're late," her mother noted. Her tone clipped. "It's 7:05, Mom," Clara replied, keeping her voice even. "I'm not late." Her mother didn't respond, instead taking a deliberate sip of her wine. Clara slid into the empty chair between her father and an empty seat, the space clearly reserved for her. The family was assembled. The performance could begin. The first half hour was excruciating. The conversation was stilted, a carefully curated selection of neutral topics. The weather, the traffic, a distant cousin's recent trip to Italy. Mark and her father did most of the talking, their voices a low drone that failed to cover the gaping silence between the sisters. Clara and Laura existed in separate orbits around the table, never speaking, never looking at each other. Amelia, sensing the strange new dynamic, was subdued, picking at her bread roll and watching the adults with wide, curious eyes. Clara felt her parents' disapproval like a physical weight. Their occasional glances in her direction were tinged with disappointment. They wanted peace. They wanted their idealized image of a happy, harmonious family, especially tonight. Her conflict with Laura was an unwelcome crack in that facade, and it was clear whom they blamed for it. Clara had disturbed the peace. Laura, the master of appearances, had ensured they saw her as the aggrieved party. The main courses arrived, providing a welcome distraction. As the waiter placed a plate of salmon in front of her, her father cleared his throat. "So," he began, looking at his wife with a fond smile, 50 years. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." Her mother blushed, a genuine happy flush that momentarily softened her features. "Oh, John, you would not." "I would," he insisted. He raised his wine glass. "A toast. To my beautiful wife, the heart of this family, and to our family itself, to 50 more years of health and happiness together." Everyone raised their glasses. "To Mom and Dad," Laura said, her voice bright and clear. "Here, here," Mark added. Clara raised her glass. "To Mom and Dad," she said softly. As they drank, her mother looked around the table, her eyes misting over. "It's all I've ever wanted," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "To have my children, my grandchildren, all of us, happy and close." Her gaze lingered for a moment too long on Clara, and the implication was clear. "You are disrupting my happiness." It was then that Laura made her move. She set her glass down and reached for her purse. "Speaking of celebrating family," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "Amelia has something she's been practicing, a little anniversary gift for her Nana and Grandpa." She produced a folded piece of paper. Amelia, who had been quiet all evening, suddenly lit up, her earlier spark returning. She stood up, cleared her throat, and began to recite a poem. It was a sweet, childish poem about love and grandparents, and Amelia delivered it with a theatrical flair that was pure Laura. She used hand gestures. She modulated her voice. She paused for dramatic effect. When she finished, she took a little bow. "Oh, sweetheart, that was beautiful!" Her grandmother gushed, her face alight with adoration. Her grandfather applauded loudly. Mark looked like the proudest father in the world. Laura was beaming, her eyes shining. She glanced across the table, and for the first time all evening she looked directly at Clara. It wasn't a look of triumph or even of malice. It was a look of pity, a condescending, dismissive look that said, "This is how it's done. You see? You can't compete. Your daughter can't compete. Why do you even try?" The injustice of it all, the calculated performance, the manipulation of their parents' emotions, the public coronation of Amelia, and the unspoken rebuke of Clara, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point in Clara's chest. Her carefully constructed composure began to crack. She had thought she could endure the evening in silence, but Laura's pity was more infuriating than her anger. Clara put her napkin on the table. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't sit there and accept that look. She couldn't let Laura win this silent, ugly war with a public poetry reading. The time for quiet dignity was over. She stood up. Every head at the table turned toward her, their expressions ranging from surprise to alarm. "Clara, what are you doing?" her mother asked, her voice a sharp whisper. Clara looked at her mother, then at her father, and finally her gaze settled on her sister. "I'd like to make a toast too," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that startled even herself. Clara picked up her water glass, her hand surprisingly steady. The silence at the table was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket of shock. Every eye was on her. "I, too, want to toast to Mom and Dad's 50 years, Clara began, her voice calm and measured. 50 years is an incredible testament to love, to partnership, and to building a family. And when I think about family, I think about what it means to truly see one another. Not just on the big stage, not just during the loud performances, but in the quiet moments. The moments that don't come with an announcement." She glanced briefly at Amelia, who was looking at her with wide, confused eyes, and then her gaze moved to her parents. A family shouldn't be a competition. It should be a safe harbor, a place where every single member feels valued, not just for the poems they can recite or the songs they can sing on command, but for the simple, wonderful fact of who they are. It's a place where the quietest voice is listened to with as much love as the loudest one. She let the words settle in the charged air. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't accused. She had simply told a truth. "So I'd like to propose a toast," she continued, looking directly at her sister now, the polished mask of indifference on Laura's face having been replaced by a thunderous expression of pure fury. "To the next 50 years. May they be filled with less performance and more presence. May we learn to celebrate the small, unseen triumphs as much as the public ones. And may we build a family where every child knows, without a single doubt, that they are enough, exactly as they are." She took a small sip of water and gently placed the glass back on the table. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad," she said, her voice softening as she looked at her parents. Her father looked stunned, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Not anger, but a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. Her mother just looked horrified, her dream of a perfect evening shattered. Clara picked up her purse from the floor. "I think it's best if I go now. I love you both." Without another look at her sister, she turned and walked away from the table. She didn't hurry. Her footsteps were silent on the thick carpet of the restaurant. She could feel the weight of their stares on her back, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel diminished by them. She felt free. The knot in her stomach, the one she had carried for so long, had finally, blessedly, dissolved. She didn't know what the fallout would be. A furious phone call from her mother? A permanent severing of ties with Laura? It was possible, maybe even likely. But as she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights blurring around her, she knew she had made the only choice she could. She had chosen her daughter over the dysfunctional piece of her family. She had chosen truth over performance. The next morning, the house was filled with the smell of sizzling bacon and the sound of Maya's happy chatter. Clara was at the stove flipping pancakes when Maya ran in, her hair still messy from sleep. "Can I have chocolate chips in mine? Please," Maya begged, wrapping her arms around Clara's legs. "I think that can be arranged," Clara said, smiling. She knelt and pulled her daughter into a hug, burying her face in her sleep-warm hair. She held her tight, a fierce, protective love swelling in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had at the picnic, but this time it wasn't laced with anxiety or resentment. It was pure, simple, and strong. Maya pulled back and looked at her, her brown eyes bright and clear. "You know what, Mommy?" she said, in that serious, matter-of-fact tone only a child can muster. "I was thinking about the squirrel song yesterday, the one you like." Clara's heart clenched. "Oh yeah? Yeah. I made up a new part for it." And standing there in the sun-drenched kitchen, in her unicorn pajamas, Maya began to sing. Her voice was small and a little off-key, the lyrics a jumble of nonsense about the squirrel going to the moon. It was the most beautiful song Clara had ever heard. And as she listened, she knew she had done the right thing. The world outside their small, happy home could be as loud and complicated as it wanted, but in here she would always make sure the sweetest voice was heard.